You resigned from a government that presided over a crisis. We now have a government that has reduced immigration to 170,000 from almost 1 million.
That's still way too many. That's still way too many.
Where do you think it should be?
As close to zero as...
Robert Jenrick sat in the cabinet while net migration hit 1 million. Now he's reforms man, and he says immigration needs to be less than zero. When asked about his own record, "Not my personal watch," he said. "I'll give my thoughts at the end of the video. Hit like and subscribe for more videos like this. Now let's get into it."
Just immigration, obviously very central to your message. You've long been arguing we've got an immigration crisis, that migration is out of control in this country. And yet, a couple of days ago, we got the latest net migration figures showing that immigration has actually plummeted from almost 1 million 3 years ago to 170,000 last year. If there ever was a crisis, and that's to be debated, it's clearly now over.
No. Look, I find it astonishing, mind-boggling that you question whether there was a crisis. We had over 1 million people coming into the country, and look, that was under my former party. I was appalled by. Ultimately,
yes,
it's why
the crisis was on your
ultimately,
watch.
Well, not my personal watch.
You were in the cabinet.
It was ultimately the reason I resigned
You're the
from the
immigration
government.
minister.
Well, yeah, I put in place.
You sat in the cabinet.
I put in place
that presided over this crisis.
I put in place the very changes that are actually bearing fruit now. But I resigned. Here's the point: I resigned because they weren't enough. What we at Reform want... Let me finish the point.
You resigned from a government that presided over a crisis. We now have a government that has reduced immigration to 170,000 from almost 1 million.
That's still way too many. That's still way too many.
Where do you think it should be?
As close to zero as possible. In fact, we want it to be less than zero.
But it's going rapidly in the right direction, which undermines your argument that we still have a crisis.
Not at all. Honestly, look, I think you're totally out of touch. We've got to bring down migration to the point where more people are leaving the country than are coming in every year. We want to have net emigration, a long period, maybe 10 years, in which we have that, to give the country breathing space.
Who do you think should be leaving?
Well, you can start with all the illegal migrants in the country.
But they're not included in these figures.
Get them out of the country as quickly as possible.
But this is legal migrants.
And then of those people who were let in legally under the last government, the so-called Boris wave, we want to get those low-wage, low-skilled migrants out of the country because they are not net contributors. They're people, if they stay here,
carers, nurses.
If they stay here for the rest of their lives, then these people are going to be costing you and I, the British taxpayer, hundreds of thousands of pounds each. In fact, we've calculated this, and the cost of the Boris wave, if it's not
But these are the people that are keeping our NHS running, Mr. Jenrick. These are the people that are caring for our elderly and our disabled. You want them to leave.
We've got almost 10 million people in this country who are either out of work claiming benefits,
but they're not qualified as nurses or carers.
Well, let's get them qualified then. Let's get them qualified. You'd rather a Brit was on the scrap heap. There's 1 million...
No, I'd rather the person that cared for my elderly parents wanted to be doing the job and was qualified to do it than someone who'd be forced into it when they had no skills to do so.
Firstly, I think that's an insult to the Brits who are working in this sector. 80% of the people working in social care in this country are British people, and I want more Brits to be doing that. There's 1 million young people at the moment who are not in work. They're not even in education or training. That number is set to rise. We've got to get those people, British people, off welfare and into the workplace, not just reach for this easy lever of foreign labour coming into the country that undercuts the wages of British workers, and it puts massive pressure on housing, on getting a doctor, getting a dentist, and the social pressure of our country changing before our very eyes. That is what reform would do.
What do you mean the social pressure?
Well, it's obviously impossible to successfully integrate millions of people in such a short period of time. For most of our country's history, we were a country marked by net emigration. More people were leaving than were coming in. It's only from the late 80s and 90s that more people were coming in every year. Then it was in the tens of thousands. The kind of numbers that we've had in recent years have made it very, very difficult to have a strong sense of national identity. And that's what Reform believes in.
If there was a crisis a few years ago, and I take your point that 1 million is certainly a lot of people, it's plummeted to 170,000. The population of this country is 70 million, increased by 0.25% last year.
Numbers that we're seeing...
The crisis is finished, Mr. Jenrick. The crisis is over.
It has not. It has not. The numbers that we are seeing today are still unprecedented in historical terms.
But they're plummeting under Labour.
Well, they're
So your whole argument,
reducing
we
as a
will
result
reduce
of
immigration. Labour's already doing it.
Look,
they're succeeding where your former party failed.
No, well, they are succeeding. They're doing more than the last Conservative government did, for sure. But that is not good enough. That's not success. Success is bringing this right down.
But they are. It's gone from 1 million to 170,000 in 3 years. If that continues,
I'm sorry.
If that continues in a couple of years' time, it will be the numbers you want to see.
Well, come back to me if the numbers were zero. They're not today. They are far higher than they've been in most of our history as a country. We've got to get them down right away.
Let's pause here because Jenrick just made a claim that falls apart immediately. He says immigration needs to be as close to zero as possible. Less than zero. Net emigration for 10 years. Ask yourself, who looks after your elderly parents? Who staffs the NHS? Who builds the houses, drives the trucks, picks the crops? Jenrick says he wants to deport low-wage, low-skilled migrants. The host asks, carers? Nurses? Jenrick dodges. He won't say yes. He won't say no. Because he knows the answer is political poison. Then there's his own record. The host reminds him, he sat in the cabinet while net migration hit 1 million. Jenrick's response, not my personal watch. That's not an answer. That's an excuse. He was a senior minister. He was part of the problem. Reform voters are being asked to trust a man who helped create the mess he now promises to clean up. And then there's the Kirklees councillor, elected to lead a council. 2 weeks later, she admits she hasn't read the Constitution, doesn't know standing orders, doesn't know what an amendment is. Jenrick's defence. She's new. She brings fresh thinking. This is reform in power. No preparation. No competence. And a shadow chancellor who won't take responsibility for his own record.
And I want to get all the illegal migrants out of the country. You know, it's completely outrageous that we've got at least 1 million, maybe more. Estimates
Boat
vary.
crossings are down 40% as well in the last year. Labour's doing a good job of this.
70,000 people, mostly young men, have broken into our country under this Labour government. Undocumented men. They're putting immense pressure on our country. They're now being housed in bedsits on people's streets. You know, do you want that on a street next to you? Well, most people in our country don't. That has to stop. It's clearly not going to stop under this Labour government. More people broke into the country over the weekend. The weather is good. It's quiet in the Channel today. Maybe more will come. Only reform has the strength and the policies that are needed to actually tackle that, end the farce of the small boats crisis.
We've been talking a lot about what reform would do in power. I just want to play you a clip of what happens when reform gets into power in Kirklees, in local government. Have a listen to this.
I don't understand the Constitution. I have not had sufficient time to read that as yet. I don't understand what standing orders are, what they're made up of, nor do I understand what an amendment is. I understand that Councillor Bolt does and is a well-respected councillor because he actually knows all of those rules. But I suggest there is a possibility that we might vote for something that we don't understand at the moment. And whereas ignorance is not a defence, risk should be mitigated.
Is that what happens when reform wins power? They turn up not having done their homework, not having bothered to do the basics about the job that they've been elected to hold?
No, look, I don't know the clip you just played me, but it sounds like sounds like you're trying to mock a decent
I'm not
person
mocking anybody
who's been elected as a councillor.
That's not a good look. She's your local group leader in Kirklees.
Well, look,
she's had 2 weeks and she hasn't bothered to read the Constitution of the council she wants to lead.
There are new people who've been elected to councils who are not from the old political parties, who come from all walks of life, bring common sense to the job. And yes, some of them will take a bit of time to learn the ropes, but they bring a lot of fresh thinking as well. Overall, if you look at reform councils, they're performing extremely well. You know, if you look at council tax, reform councils are increasing council tax less than their Conservative or their Labour peers. And that's only after being in place for a year or more. You know, I'm very confident that the new councils that we've just taken over are going to do well. And look, if people really liked...
a reform representative aspiring to lead a council 2 weeks after being elected ought to have read the rules of the council she seeks to lead?
Well, if people really liked their local Labour or Conservative council, why have they ditched them all? People are voting in their droves for reform because they know that reform run councils well, that they bring fresh thinking and common sense to the job.
And I put it to you, that clip is not how anybody should behave.
You think that Labour and Conservative council will professionally run?
I'm simply saying that having turned up
Birmingham
to a meeting,
City Council almost
2 weeks
bankrupt.
after being
Nottingham
elected,
City almost
saying, I
bankrupt.
haven't read the rules, but make me council leader, is not a good look for your
Using
party.
one example, there were 5,000 council candidates at the last election. Overall, reform councils are clearly doing a good job, and that's why people are voting for reform. The last council elections, just 2 weeks or so ago, were very clear. We won thousands of councillors
how you
across
behave
the
in government.
country.
You're not going to get into power nationally and turn up and say, well, I don't know, I haven't read the rules, I don't know what's going on,
Well,
really.
it sounds like what this Labour government did. They turned up without any plan, and they'll smash the gangs. Well, that didn't work out, did it? Won't increase taxes.
Well, the
Rachel
small boat
Reeves,
crossings are down
she
42%, so perhaps
she
it is
increased
working.
taxes by £26 billion and rising. Andy Burnham
But
says,
let's come
I
back
don't
to
need
the
to bother
point,
about
because
the bond
there are
markets.
concerns about what reform would actually look like in power. And I'd put it to you, just based on that clip and others, that some of your local government representatives are not doing much to reassure those concerns that people have.
No, I fundamentally disagree. Look, I understand the game that the media wants to play. You want to criticise reform, but it's clearly not working.
I don't want to criticise anybody. I'm
It's
simply
clearly not
asking
working with
your
the general.
interpretation of that clip.
It's clearly not working with the public because the public are voting for reform. They did at the local
That
elections.
doesn't mean we shouldn't hold you
They
accountable where you win power.
They see reform in local government. They want more of
That
it.
doesn't mean that accountability and scrutiny aren't important when it comes to what your representatives are doing. Very final question. Nigel Farage claims today that the disclosure about his £5 million gift from a crypto billionaire in Thailand was obtained by the Russian state hacking his phone. If he believes that's the case, presumably he'll be referring that to the police and the security services.
Well, that's for Nigel, but yeah, it is a very serious situation, and I would like to think that the police and the security services helped him in this. It shows the amount of pressure that he's under, both in terms of physical threats and indeed we've seen cyber threats now.
It's a big allegation.
And I'd like to believe that the government and the authorities would do more to support him. You know, I've for a long time thought it was wrong.
He will be referring this matter
well,
to the authorities.
that you'd have to ask Nigel himself. That's obviously his own.
It'd be very strange if he believes he'd been hacked by Vladimir Putin. It'd be very strange if he didn't seek further
If you're trying to turn this around and make it sound like Nigel's the one who's doing something wrong,
Not at
then,
all. I'm just asking whether he'll be referring.
He's the victim in this. You know, he's somebody who's under a lot of physical threats. He's also under, as you've seen for this, cyber threats, including from, in this case, hostile states like potentially Russia. Incidentally, it also blows apart this silly argument that's been put around by the Labour Party that somehow Nigel is close to Putin. It sounds like it's Russia that was actually trying to hack into his emails and phone to actually cause him personal harm.
I'm not disputing whether or not he's the victim. He says he is. He's told the Mail on Sunday that.
Well, he clearly
Given
is.
he's told the media, I'm just asking whether he'll be reporting it to MI5 as well.
Well, look, he's had to, because he doesn't get any help from the authorities, he's had to go and use a private firm to find this out. It's obviously up to him whether he does that.
OK, let's summarise. Jenrick makes promises that sound good. No tax on overtime. Cut immigration. Get tough on welfare. But every time he's asked for details, he deflects. He can't say how he'll pay for his £5 billion tax cut. He won't say which migrants he'd deport. And when the host asks about carers and nurses, he dodges. Because the answer is political poison. Then there's his own record. The host reminds him, he sat in the cabinet while net migration hit 1 million. His response: not my personal watch. That's not an answer. That's an excuse. He was a senior minister. He was part of the problem. And then there's the reform councillor in Kirklees, elected to lead a council. 2 weeks later, she admits she hasn't read the Constitution, doesn't know standing orders, doesn't know what an amendment is. Jenrick's defence: she's new. She brings fresh thinking. No accountability. No standards. The host asked the killer question. Immigration has plummeted from 1 million to 170,000 under Labour. Isn't the crisis over? Jenrick couldn't admit it. Because if the crisis is over, reform has nothing to run on. The truth is, reform isn't offering solutions. They're offering anger. Vague promises. No plans. And a candidate who helped cause the mess he now claims he can clean up. Jenrick was the establishment. He sat in the room. He owns the failure. Now he wants you to believe he's the outsider. Don't fall for it. What do you think? Would you trust Robert Jenrick to run the country's finances? Thanks for watching. Hit like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. See you in the next one.